since we have new friends today, this makes more sense to go through our usual spiel. So for our agenda, we're going to do a quick introduction. We're going to talk about the causes and effects of climate change. We're going to talk about how we can help, and then we'll go over our activities and our resources. So you guys know me, I'm Megan. I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom, and I work at scientist.com with your moms and dads. And I have a background in science and poop, which I left up from last time. So this is a picture of me when I'm volunteering at Pinnacles National Park. And so I actually get to do a little bit of climate research while I'm there as well. So that's why I left this picture up. So I also love to share cool facts, and I like to teach and help you guys learn. So that's why we're doing this today. And also because you guys are out of school, it's summertime, but unfortunately moms and dads don't get the greatest summer break. So we're still working, and I'm trying to help out with that and help you guys have some fun learning new things. Okay, so we're going to get into climate change, cause and effect. So what is climate change? And you guys probably have a good idea about this, but climate change is meaning like there's a change in the average or the normal conditions, such as temperature, so how hot or cold it is outside, and rainfall, the amount of precipitation or moisture that's falling from the sky. And this happens in a region or an area over a long period of time. So scientists, and especially those at NASA who I got a lot of this information from, they've been observing that the surface of our Earth is warming. So it's getting hotter, and many of the warmest times we've ever seen in the world have happened in the last just 20 years. But there is a difference between weather and climate. So this is important. Weather is basically what's going on at your house or where you are right this second. So if you see that it's raining outside or it's snowing, that's your local weather. For me today, it's sunny and probably 77 outside. And so that is kind of a snapshot or a picture of the weather and the conditions at a certain time. Climate is a little bit different. So it's more than just 1 or 2 days that you observe. It's weather conditions that are expected in your region or area over a particular time of year or years. So climate might be, it's usually hot in the summer, or it's hot where you live, or it's dry, or it's rainy or wet. And a region's climate is usually looked at in periods of 30 years or more. So it's a longer term observation, not just a couple days or a day here or there. Okay. So an example of that is like 1 or 2 weeks of rainy weather wouldn't change the climate in somewhere that's a desert, like Phoenix, Arizona, for example. Just because it rained there a little bit doesn't mean it's not still a dry desert climate. Okay. So climate is regulated or controlled by a lot of complex interactions. So really complicated different things come into what the climate is. So there's a lot of components in the system that make up our Earth that impact climate. So you can see here, there's some different types of weather happening, and there's permafrost in the ground, so parts of the ground that are always frozen. There's soil moisture, there's surface runoff, there's rivers and lakes, and then you can see the water is evaporating back into the sky, and then it precipitates or rains back down. So all of this cycle and these things that are happening are controlling our climate. So when climates change, it means that the average conditions or the normal conditions somewhere, like especially for temperature or the heat or the cold, or for the rainfall, the moisture, they're changing over a long period of time. So a good example of this is about 20,000 years ago, most of the US was covered with glaciers. And so if you guys have learned about geology or anything in your area, sometimes there's places where the glaciers came down and pushed everything into big flat piles. So a lot of Wisconsin is super flat because glaciers came down and came through. And today we know that we have a warmer climate, right? There's no glaciers in Wisconsin anymore. And so those changes happen over a long period of time. But climate change in a kind of a less positive sense is happening right now. And this is a picture of the Muir Glacier in Alaska, and this is between 1941 and 2004. And these are taken from the same point, because you can see the same mountains in the distance, but look how much this has shrunk. So this used to be all ice, and now there's basically a lake there with a little bit of glacier up in the corner. So these things are happening, and they're happening all over the world, so all across the globe. And global climate change is really the average changes over these long periods of time, and they're causing different things like sea levels to go up. The glaciers, like we saw in the last picture, are shrinking, and then the ice is melting at a faster rate in places that usually have ice. And there's also changes in the flowers and the plants blooming time. So this is a big deal for people doing agriculture that grow our food, or even for those of us who have gardens. It's changing the rate and the times at which we plant. And because the life on our earth is dependent on and shaped by our climate, this is really important. And the climate can vary through natural means, but it can also vary through means that we influence as humans. And so we can see over the last, 150-ish years, that the Earth's climate has been changing. So even long before humans were around, the Earth's climate was changing, but that was a natural cycle. And in the last 150 years, the average temperature has been increasing really quickly. So that's not so good, because when things change quickly, animals and plants can't adapt very well. Because remember how we talked about how evolution takes place over really long periods of time that we can't see with our naked eye. Well, we're not giving animals and plants a chance to catch up with these changes. And then some parts of the Earth are actually warming faster than others. So on the average, the air temperature near the surface of the Earth where we live has gone up about 2 degrees in the past 100 years. And in the past 5 years, we've had some of the warmest in like centuries of recording temperature. So lots of people are really worried about this. And that includes some scientists, or a lot of scientists, that are concerned about climate change, because it also can change the amount of water that falls from the sky, so rainstorms, and how intense those storms are. So it can cause weather events that are kind of dangerous for people and animals and structures and things. So even though the temperatures only increased by a couple degrees, this actually is a big impact. So the climate change is mainly caused by the greenhouse effect. So the biggest source of energy for our Earth's climate is, does anybody know where we get all the energy from?
The sun.
Yes, exactly. So from the sun. And there's lots of factors that contribute to our climate, like I showed you before, but some gases that are in our atmosphere kind of act like a big greenhouse. Like, you know how you put plants in a greenhouse and the sun comes in through the glass, and then the gas or the air inside the greenhouse warms up and keeps the plants warm. Well, these gases that surround our Earth like kind of a bubble are doing that as well. They're keeping the heat in from the sun. And what we've been doing, burning coal and wood and powering factories and cars and airplanes and buses and all these things, they're adding gas to that greenhouse layer. So it's meaning that more of the heat stays in that bubble around the Earth and gets reflected around and then warms the Earth. And we can see that because of that effect, it's actually decreasing the amount of ice that we have in the Arctic. So when the Earth warms, the oceans and everything else are absorbing more energy, they're warming, and you can see here the sea ice up in the Arctic from the 1980s to the 2010s is getting quite a bit smaller. And thinking about things like these systems together, we're talking about temperature warming and ice melting and sea levels rising. These systems all impact each other and are all related. So some of the things that scientists are doing, like the ones at NASA, are observing photographs and things from satellites and taking lots of measurements to learn more about this and learn more about how our Earth systems work together. And that can help us understand how these little changes in one place can contribute to big changes across the Earth's global climate, so across the entire world. And when I showed you that picture before of me at Pinnacles, this is a picture someone took of a weather station at Pinnacles. So this one is up on a trail that I usually take. I hike about a 10-mile loop and up to see the condors and things. And this weather station is there. And every day when I start, I go and I open the door and I record the high temperature and the low temperature from the night before, as well as the humidity and the time the sun rose and the time the sun set. And that information has been logged at this weather station for a very, very long time. And this is kind of an old school weather station. There's really new fancy technology that does this as well, but because it's in the national park, we also keep these handwritten records because it's kind of a traditional thing. But so people have been doing these kinds of things for a long time, and that's part of the reason that we know that these changes are occurring. So I mentioned before that humans are impacting this climate change, right? And so there's a lot of interactions between us as people and nature and the climate. And so I found this cool graphic that kind of shows you it's very busy. But the idea is that all these things that we're doing are affecting and impacting this cycle. So when we're farming, when we're driving, when we're doing all sorts of things, even hiking, these things that we are doing can impact the natural areas that we're in, and also can disrupt the systems that usually keep our climate kind of at a regular level, right? Where if you think of it like the climate's on a teeter-totter, we're pushing the teeter-totter one way pretty hard because of all of our activities. And so these impacts are problematic or difficult for different types of areas. And I'm going to show you some of those effects of the climate change. So one of those impacts is on polar regions. So you guys probably know who this is. This is a polar bear. And climate change is causing pretty big changes in the Arctic and to polar landscapes and to the seascapes or the oceans there. And so with the temperatures rising and the ice shrinking, it's causing issues for animals that rely on the ice to have their babies and to hunt and to do other things. So we know that polar bears kind of swim around for a while and find food, or sometimes they hunt from the ice, but they're having to swim farther and farther to look for food because there isn't as much ice. And then seals and things like that that have to have their babies on the ice are running out of space to do that. The other thing that climate change is doing to the ocean is acidifying it. And this one is a little bit confusing, but basically what happens is the amount of acid in the ocean because of all these climate change is increasing. And the problem with that is that it breaks down, these acids actually break down the shells and the calcium that is in things like clams and mollusks and coral especially. And so they can't calcify their shells to make them hard. And then the shells are misshapen or they don't work quite right. And then the animals can't really grow. So it really is a problem for things like oyster banks or seagrass beds or coral reefs. And those are all areas that can actually really help shield the rest of the ocean from pollution. So we need to make sure that we're kind of protecting those areas against climate change. So it's also impacting freshwater. So not just seawater, but freshwater. And freshwater ecosystems, where lots of different types of animals live, are seeing declines in something called biodiversity, which is the amount of different species found in that area. And they're also kind of threatened because of the lowering water levels. So if you guys, for those of you that live in California, this is a pretty common sight. When I'm out driving around, I see reservoirs that are clearly very, very much lower than they were in years past, especially during drought season. So not only is this bad for humans that need to use water for things like agriculture or, for drinking and eating and bathing and things in our house, but it's really bad for animals and for animals that live in that water. So another thing that this impacts is grasslands. And a lot of us don't really think about grasslands very much as being super important, but they actually are really critical for a lot of animals. And they're actually being degraded or kind of hurt a lot quicker than some of the other landscapes that we see. And one of the things happening is called desertification. So it basically means that these grasslands are drying out and turning into deserts. And one of the issues with that is that once they go to a desert, it's really hard to get them to turn back into a natural grassland. So in this picture, this is 3 pictures of the same area from 1902, where you see there's like a nice grassland here, and then 1951 it's starting to dry out, there's more cacti, and then in 2003 it's almost all cacti and mesquite. So a lot of this can happen during poor management of animals that are grazing and things like that, as well as the droughts and things like that as well can cause these issues. And crop production can also be a problem there. So people doing too much agriculture, and it's really changing what the land is. And if you think about it, then all the animals that survive in that grassland can no longer hang out because now it's a new climate, right? It's a new desert. Another impact is on forests. So if you look here, there's a bunch of dead trees. And this was actually a photo taken in 2004, and it shows aspen, which is a type of tree that was killed during a drought a few years prior. So this is up in Canada. And forests are actually being destroyed because of this climate change, not only because we are cutting trees down in the forest to consume or to, clear land for agriculture, but also because of the droughts and things with the changes. The trees just aren't getting enough water and they're dying. So temperature limits as well can cause problems, because if you think about it, you see different types of forests depending on where you are, right? And a lot of that has to do with the climate and the temperature. And so if we're changing the temperatures in different places, those same forests and forest animals probably can't survive there. And then finally, another impact is on our food. So even if you weren't concerned about the environment at all, you should be concerned about having food to eat, right? Or most people should be. And droughts and things like that can be a big problem for agriculture. So I know that when I drive through California in different areas, there's lots of signs up about droughts and water conservation and food production in those areas, because they supply food to a lot of other parts of the country. And so it's really critical that we're careful with our water in these areas. So now that we talked about that, and it is a little bit scary, right? Climate change, because we know it's not good for the earth. I want to talk about how we can actually help, because it doesn't all have to be scary and awful. It can be really positive that we have a chance to do something to really change the world for the better. So one of the ways that we can help is by saving water. And you guys can save water in a lot of places in your house, in the kitchen, in the garden, but you can also save water in the bathroom. And this is probably one of the easiest ones for all of us to do. So one of the things I do is when I'm brushing my teeth, I only turn the water on if I'm rinsing my toothbrush. I don't keep it on the whole time. That saves a little bit of water. I try to take short showers, and sometimes I even turn off the shower while I'm soaping up my hair or doing other things, because I don't need to have the water on me on that during those times. And I also don't always flush the toilet every single time. And that does sound a little bit gross, but for a lot of families, it's very normal to not flush the toilet every time. And so maybe talk to your parents about what they would prefer that you would do. But it can actually save a lot of water if you're not flushing all the time, or if you have a toilet that has the options to do a little flush and then a big flush, which are super common in Europe, and they're becoming more popular in the United States. You guys can also walk or bike. So this is me coming back from a bike ride in front of my two bikes on their bike rack. And I have different bikes for different things. I really enjoy biking, but a lot of people use their bikes to go to school, like this kid over here. He's on an electric bike, so you can go even farther. And you can use your bike, or you can walk maybe to neighborhood shops or to your friends' houses, or maybe even to school if you get up a little bit earlier. And you can actually save a lot of carbon emission from our carbon footprint and reduce your impact on the earth when you do that. Plus, it's really fun. I know Aiden likes to scooter when we go places. So you don't have to just walk or bike. You can scooter or unicycle or use a pogo stick or rollerblades, whatever you're doing is good.
I like to ride on my bike a lot too, though.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can also save electricity and energy at home. So most of these things are not things I would expect you guys to do. Brandon, I'm not going to make you put solar panels on the house as homework. Don't worry. But you guys can turn off light switches when you leave rooms, and you can talk to your parents about doing a lot of these things.
I already want to put solar panels on our roof.
Cool. Good job.
For some reason, I'd never asked.
You should ask. That can be part of your homework. So you guys can talk to your parents about making some of these changes in your house. And sometimes they do require a little bit of money up front, but then they save energy in the long run. One of the things I do, I live in an apartment, so I don't have a lot of control over what's going on here, but I use fans instead of air conditioning. I turn off lights. I wash my clothes in cold water instead of hot. And I also do something called, we call it ohm hours here. And so I'll send a link to this to your parents for in case you live in California. But what this means is that I participate in a program where they send me certain times of the day or the week where lots and lots of people are using power. And a big group of us shuts down our power completely during that time. So it's usually for about an hour, and Aiden and Lizzie have done it with me a couple times. And we shut down our power for the hour, and then you actually get paid back from them because you're taking coal power plants offline because nobody's using, or less people are using electricity. And you can save so much over time that you save the energy companies money, and then they actually pay you back, and it's pretty cool. So you can see here for the last couple ones, this was my expected energy and then how much I use. And so I actually have some smart switches in my house, which means they automatically turn off appliances at certain times. And you can even get thermostats and things for your house that do that for you, that connect to your phone so you can monitor your energy use. It's pretty cool.
We have a Tesla, and that is electronic, and it's
Yeah,
good for the environment.
that's very good. Yeah,
But electricity, when you make electricity, can be bad for the environment.
it can be, but there's different ways of making electricity, and some are cleaner than others. So things like wind, solar power, those are okay, good for the environment, and things like coal are a little bit dirtier, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we can also reduce our waste. So things like using a reusable water bottle instead of buying bottled plastic water, making your own cleaning products, like using vinegar and water instead of buying things from the store. Using cloth diapers, using soap instead of body wash. There's lots of things you can do. I know Aiden and Lizzie and I have reusable water bottles, and we use reusable straws that we've had for a very long time, reusable coffee cups and things like that. And you guys can use reusable bags when you go to the store too. One of the smart things to do is to put your reusable bags in your car every time after you use them so that they're there when you're ready. So you guys can help with this by reminding your parents to bring their reusable bags to the store.
Instead of buying the new bottles of soap, we get the bags that have the liquid in it, so we can just pour it in.
That's a very good idea. So buying big bulk containers of things to pour into your smaller containers can save a lot of waste as well. And we can also use less plastic. So in general, when we're using less things, that's good, but using less plastic is even better. So we can try to use glass jars for things, trying not to do fast food, or not taking plastic bags to put around your fruit when you go to the store, and just putting them in your reusable bag is really helpful. And then obviously, having your own spoons and forks and things. Like when I eat out, or if I'm picking up food and the place has has plastic utensils, I usually tell them no thank you, and then I just use mine at home. So doing little things like that can really help in the long run. But I want you guys to know that this is not your fault. Like, any of the climate change stuff going on has nothing to do really with what you guys have been doing as kids, right? Like, you guys are not running factories or doing agriculture or doing any of these things. So most of the climate change and the greenhouse gases are actually coming from companies. So a lot of the emissions are coming from the energy sector. So the ones that are producing coal power and things like that. And so you can see greenhouse gas emissions are mostly coming from electricity and heat from sources that are not clean, like solar and wind power, and a lot from agriculture, industry, and then the transportation, our trucks taking things across the country for us. And then we're getting into littler bits of it where we can contribute to it. So it's super important that we choose to be more energy efficient and clean in our own house. But we also need to convince other people who are in charge of these big things to help clean up some of their mess, right? Because this is our mess as adults. It's not your mess as kids. But you guys can help influence adults and tell them about it and tell them you want to have a clean earth to inherit. So some other things you can do on your end are to speak up. So to tell other adults, like if you're with your parents, you can say, hey, let's get reusable straws, or let's not get takeout, or let's get this in a glass jar instead of plastic, things like that. You can remind them. But you can also speak up to elected officials. So whether that's writing a letter to the President of the United States, like this kid did, or it's speaking out at a protest, or teaching other kids at your school, about it. Any little bit that you can do to convince other people that climate change is real and that it's happening and that we need to be responsible for it is good stuff. So even though it's not your guys' fault, unfortunately, and it's not really, I mean, I didn't do it either, right? But it's all of our responsibility to try to clean it up and try to convince the people in charge that it's the right thing to do to make it better. Okay.
You're right. It's not our fault, but it kind of is. Because all of the things like things that aren't really helping the environment add up. So it can also include us too.
That's true. So even though we're all probably a small part of this, we can make a difference. It's kind of like voting, right? Even though you're one person, your vote can make a huge difference. So it's really important to speak out about things like that and to, you know, teach other people as well, because I feel like once we teach enough people about this, we can do something about it, right? So your guys' activities for this week are a little bit different. So for little kids, you can choose one. You can draw the earth, you can draw an animal that's impacted by climate change, or you can explain climate change to someone in your family. So you can tell your mom and your dad, if they weren't in this class, you can call your grandma or your grandpa or aunts or uncles or anyone you want and explain climate change to them. For big kids, you can draw a picture of climate change impacting our planet. You can make a comic about fixing climate change, or you can write a short letter or email to an elected official for your region or area explaining why they should care about climate change. And then for middle schoolers, you can write a letter or email to an elected official, again, explaining why they should care about climate change, maybe a little bit longer if you're at this age. You can draw the earth with the greenhouse effect, or you can create a comic about the impact of climate change on wildlife. So of course, you guys know you can email your homework to me, and we're gonna do like a big raffle thing at the end of the semester this time. And then I have lots of resources here for you that I'll share with you. So a lot of these are from NASA. They have some really helpful pages. And there's also some really good ones from the World Wildlife Foundation and a couple different things that really explain a lot of these topics in more depth and show us things that we can do to help.